Hey, Pretty Girl Club. Today I want to talk about how being exotic is not a competition. One thing that I've noticed from the mono black community is the first thing that they did was they told us to get out of their exclusive spaces due to us benefiting from things like mixed race privilege, colorism, texturism, and featureism. And so once we get out of their spaces, they chase us over to our spaces so they can attempt to divide us up based on skin tone, hair texture. A lot of people don't like that I allow monoracial women on my channel. A lot of people hate the fact that there are dark-skinned women who can benefit from texturism and featureism. That's very triggering. And I've noticed that with the rise of all of us making our channels, unfortunately, a lot of women are realizing that they've never had pretty privilege. And obviously, that wasn't my intention. My intention wasn't to expose people like, oh, if you didn't have this experience, you didn't have pretty privilege. But it seems like this space on YouTube has triggered a lot of women's insecurities. So it's very hard if you don't feel like you're pretty. It's hard for you to watch content about women who are having kind of that pretty girl experience and maybe like the jealousy that comes with it, or maybe they're being othered because of it, or maybe people are blaming their beauty on their skin tone, like, oh, well, they only think you're pretty because you're light skinned, they only think you're pretty because of your hair texture. One thing that I've noticed is that the women who have these hierarchy mindsets and they have these inferiority complexes, they have a tendency to rush over to spaces that weren't created to cater for them. I mean, I've said it 1,000 times on this channel. My channel was not created to cater to the same audience as a channel like Chrissy's, for example. Her channel is exclusively for mono, unambiguous, dark-skinned black women with the 4C hair and the broad features. By the way, there is a reason that they created the term unambiguous. So for the people who try to make the argument, oh, we all look the same, we all have the same experience, you guys are not special, there's no need for these channels. Well, if there's no need for channels like mine, then that would mean that there would be no need for channels like in the black empowerment space. That would mean that there are no need for channels for unambiguous mono dark-skinned black women. And we all know that that's false. And another thing that people will say is, oh, the differences that you experience as a mixed race person versus a fully black person are very small. Like, there's such tiny differences. These are such tiny nuances. And it's like, okay, well, guess what? I get to create a YouTube channel based on all of those nuances. And who gon' check me? Another issue that I've noticed when it comes to people with inferiority complexes is people don't like it when you use a positive nickname to describe yourself. So remember how the rapper Mulatto, they tried to get her to change her name. They're like, you shouldn't call yourself Mulatto because you're being racist, you're being colorist, you're trying to like promote your phenotype, you think you're better than black women. And I'm not going to allow people to do that to my channel. I'm not changing my channel name. I'm never changing my core audience. We're not going anywhere. And another thing that I've noticed, another big mistake that a lot of people make is they try to deplatform people. Deplatforming doesn't work. Anybody who works in marketing or in PR would know that canceling somebody is actually not possible unless, of course, that person decides to cancel themselves and maybe like leave the industry or quit their job or whatever. But when it comes to something where you are the owner of it, like a YouTube channel, or let's say you start a business or something, nobody can really cancel it. It's like if people want to cancel this term exotical, or they want to cancel these spaces, the only way they can cancel us is by simply not watching, which is actually what I would want, because then we can focus on attracting the right audience. But another thing that I've noticed is that a lot of people who have a hierarchy mindset, they get mad when you embrace who you are, especially if you have proximity to them. So I actually noticed this with Ice Spice. A lot of people were saying that she's basic and mediocre, but the only reason they're saying that is because she has broad features. She has the broader jawline, broader face, broad lips, broad nose, and she has kind of this kinky curly afro, and it's like, okay, so what makes her mediocre? You're basically admitting that you believe that all of her features other than her light skin tone makes her mediocre. But over here in this space, we don't have that mindset of, oh, blackness makes a person mediocre. No, on this channel, I like to celebrate both our blackness as well as our ambiguity. I like to celebrate our black features as well as our non-black features. And I've noticed that the people who lack nuance, they don't understand that that's possible because they're used to living their life in a very one-dimensional way. And so to them, they feel like it's impossible for you to be a multifaceted, multiracial, multicultural human being. So that's breaking too many stereotypes. And another critique that I've heard some people say is they'll try to say, well, you're only slightly mixed, or you're not biracial, or you're not light skinned, or your hair's still nappy, or, it's the same talking point of trying to use that person's blackness against them. So it's a variation of the whole you're not special argument. And another reason that people do this is because they don't want you to leave the black community. They want you to stay in the unambiguous black spaces. They don't want to suffer alone. This actually reminds me of the interview that I did with the lady who was a skin lightener. And she was talking about how part of the reason people got mad at her is because they literally saw it as she's leaving their community. Like they're just going to be left alone at the bottom to kind of suffer alone. And I've noticed that people are starting to do that with this space here on YouTube. First of all, I think it's amazing that we have so many girls who are like making channels and we're like having fun over here. Multiple girls in the space have passed like 1,000 subscribers, 2,000 subscribers. I see a lot of people starting new channels every day at this point. I know that we're somewhere around 50 people who have channels. We may be past that. And by the way, when it comes to me sharing channels, I don't have any strategy behind it. Looking back, maybe I should have more of a strategy, but if I forget your channel, or if I haven't seen your channel yet, or if you, I don't know, if you comment or something and I don't reply, it's not on purpose. But have you ever noticed that whenever you are innovating and whenever you're building something fabulous, the people who are not good at building stuff for themselves, they will get mad when you don't want to represent them. And it's like, the reason that this space was even created, or at least for me personally, the reason I created this channel was partially because it is literally a response to the past 10 to 15 years of having other channels. And I tend to say Chrissy's name, but she's really not the only channel. She's just kind of the only one I can think of. But it's like, there have been channels on here for 10 to 15 years speaking on behalf of other communities. And so it's like, why would I speak on behalf of unambiguous mono dark skinned black women, or try to pretend like I have the same experiences and the same traumas when I don't? There are a lot of things that were talked about on other YouTube channels that I could not relate to, and I think that's the case for a lot of us over here in this space. But I've noticed that one of the tactics that people have been trying to use against the people who create their YouTube channels is, well, you're not as exotic as so and so. Like I saw somebody say on someone else's channel, you're not as exotic as Exoticals United. And it's like, wait a minute. First of all, nobody even knows anyone here on YouTube. Secondly, being exotic is not a competition. Anybody can be exotic to anybody else. Okay? We all know that exoticism is really based on opposites. So that's why the colorism conversation, when it comes to that, people use that term light skin because they know that in the black community that the majority of monoracial black people do not have these like yellowish, golden, beige skin tones. And so that's why people tend to exotify maybe a light skin tone. Same thing goes in the opposite direction. This is why you've got unambiguous black women divesting and going to white men, because they know that they will benefit from dark-skinned privilege in the presence of white men, in the sense of, you're going to be exotified. But I've noticed one thing that the divestors don't talk about is that even lighter skinned women who are black as well, and mixed race women with golden skin tones, they will still benefit from having their skin tone exotified, even in white spaces as well. But I've noticed they try to leave that out because for a lot of women, the divestment thing seems to be about kind of competing or getting revenge on black men, or kind of throwing it in the face of mixed women. And this is why sometimes I wish that some of the original women who kind of pioneered the whole divesting thing would talk about this, because I really do feel like a lot of the unambiguous women, they kind of latched on to the divestment movement and they kind of made it this revenge of the femcells style movement, and it actually harmed the women who were just being genuine in the beginning. Another talking point that people try to say is, you need to prove to me how pretty you are, or they will attempt to dox myself or dox other people within this space. And it's because they want to go out of their way to try to invalidate you. And it's so funny because my talking point with that is, even when it comes to something like doxing, okay, what's the point? Like, let's say you show that person, then what? Like, did you win anything? Did their subscriber count go to zero? Are you just trying to show the person so that you can say that they're ugly? And if so, what's ugly about them? Because usually when people call you ugly, what they're really saying is you're black. I've noticed that unfortunately in the black community, they've got a lot of internalized colorism, texturism, and featureism. And so, for example, let's say you're light skinned, like I Spice, and you're mixed race, and your light skin is the only feature about yourself that is not unambiguous looking, and then all of the rest of your features look more adjacent to kind of the West African, unambiguous African American, then suddenly you become mediocre. But then if you ask them to point to the features that make you mediocre, they're going to go silent because then their internalized texturism and featureism is going to come out. Another thing that I've seen some people say is, oh, you're exotic to who? You're pretty to who? You have pretty privilege according to who? And it's like, according to myself. I'm the one that gets to be in charge of my life. I'm the one that gets to determine my self-image and self-esteem, hence why it's called self-esteem. Maybe if other people began to take on that internal locus of control, then they themselves would have higher self-esteem and they wouldn't feel the need to chase after a movement that was not intended for them. I've also noticed that what people like to do in the exotical community, like people will try to triangulate us against each other. They'll be like, oh, well, so-and-so other person is prettier than you, or this other biracial person. Remember with Aoki Lee Simmons, they tried to compare her to Sophia Richie, who is more white looking. And then they were like, oh, Sophia Richie is prettier than Aoki because she looks more white. And so they're trying to triangulate those two women. And I've noticed that people will try to do that over here in this space. So like with our YouTube channels, people will try to be like, oh, well, you're not as good as this other person, or you're not as light skinned as this other person, or your hair's nappy, or you're not as good at explaining stuff as this other person over here. And all of those things are just good old-fashioned humbling tactics. They're good old-fashioned triangulation tactics. People are doing that because they want you to feel the same inferiority that they feel. And oftentimes people do this when they feel left behind. They're mad that you have a creative idea and that you're executing it. People are mad when you are disciplined and you're willing to level up. And so sometimes people will do whatever they can to try to stop you. But being exotic is not a competition. Only people with a hierarchy mindset or internalized anti-blackness view exoticism as a competition. And usually if people say you're not exotic, what they really mean is you're not white enough. You're not white enough. I've noticed the same thing whenever people say things like you don't look mixed. Generally speaking, what they really mean is you don't look white. And you guys know that we demolish those talking points on this channel all the time, but what do you ladies think? Have you ever had someone try to discount your mixture or your background? Have you ever had someone try to convince you that you shouldn't embrace who your own family members are? Have you ever had someone try to invalidate you because you're not at least 50% white? What do you ladies think? Let me know in the comment section and I'll talk to you next time. Stay pretty, ladies.